Australian concert pianist Piers Lane came to prominence in 1977 at the inaugural Sydney International Piano Competition and has since then gone on to develop a wonderful career playing with all the major orchestras and conductors around the world. He's won many prizes for his piano playing and is artistic director for several music festivals, and I'm delighted that he's taken the time to come and chat to me today as part of my Classical Conversations series here at Steinway Hall in London. Welcome, Piers.
Thank you, Melanie.
Lovely to chat to you today. I'm just going to start by asking all about your musical education. How old you were when you started? What was the catalyst? And whether you come from a musical family?
I certainly did come from a musical family. My father was a Londoner and met my mother when they both auditioned at the Royal College of Music. My mother was Queensland born from Australia, and so I started life actually in London. And I was only 5 months old when I was shipped south, but there was always that umbilical connection,
Yes.
Which meant something to me later in a strange way. Anyway, I loved when I was a little boy listening to lessons taking place in the home. You know, I would lie under the dining room table while my father taught adult students, and then I'd hear them discussed at the table. So I was always very much part of my parents' teaching life. I didn't start lessons till I was 7 in a little class that my mother had, and went ahead quite quickly. I think I used to read through the rest of the book, you know, and I used to love pulling music out of the cupboard and sight reading. And I remember when I was 9 finding the Grieg Concerto and just thinking, oh, isn't this fantastic? Yes, so I did have a musical upbringing, and that counts for a lot, I think.
Yes,
it was always very natural.
So which teachers then do you feel were most influential or most inspiring?
Well, my mother was my first teacher. And I studied with her till I was about 12. She used to hate it later when I'd say that many of my lessons were called out from the ironing board, but it was true. And there were just lots of little things. I remember sight reading through the Mozart K488 slow movement once and feeling a little bit pleased with myself. I was only very young. And my mother said, yes, but it's supposed to be very sad. And I thought, oh, I haven't done it right. And I went and played it in a totally different way. And just that sort of thing, that there was instant response to what I did at home. Very important,
that's a big help, isn't it?
So Mum was a terrific teacher. And then I went to Dr. William Lovelock. You may have heard of him because he wrote endless textbooks on harmony and counterpoint. And he wasn't an academic sort of piano teacher at all, funnily enough. He himself had studied with Henry Gale, who left a set of hand development exercises, mainly with the intention of getting rid of the webbing between fingers so that you could increase span and that sort of thing, and independence. But Gale had studied with Leschetizky, so there was that sort of connection, which was lovely. And he, I went to him originally to study Bach, and when I was 12 took the C minor toccata, but I think I only ever learned one other partita with him. And he asked me the next week to bring Aquarelle by Dr. William Lovelock. So it was quite fun because he was interested in that salon style as well, which was of great use in my life, as we'll hear later perhaps. But after Lovelock, I went to Nancy Weir. You may not have heard of her, but she was a great pianist and she was a very great person, wonderful raconteuse as well. She had been a child prodigy. She grew up in a tiny town in outback Victoria, where her father was an Irish publican. And guests to the pub used to hear this little child do whatever they asked for on the piano. She could play by ear amazingly. And someone said she should be with the nuns in Melbourne. And she was sent to Melbourne, studied with the rather formidable Ada Freeman, later Ada Corder, she was a phenomenal teacher, and she was the first in Australia to play the Elgar Piano Quintet and a lot of Ravel. She had telegrams from these people thanking her for performing in Australia. Amazing connections there. But Nancy, when she was 12, played Beethoven 3 with the Melbourne Symphony. There were mounted police keeping back the crowds on the way in. She was a celebrity at 12 sort of thing, but the people of Victoria raised funds to send her to Berlin at 13 to study with Arthur Schnabel. And Schnabel loved Nancy, and she was part of his class for 3 years and used to holiday with his family in Como during the summer and that sort of thing. And when she was 17, she came to London and studied at the Royal Academy of Music with Craxton and later with Mattei. And at the same time as Maura Limpany, they were there together. When the war came, she joined the WAFs. She was in Air Force Intelligence, actually, because, of course, she had totally fluent German from having lived her teenage years in Berlin, and so she became a code breaker and that sort of thing. Fascinating.
Yes.
She was highly intelligent. She played in Egypt and Italy, where she was stationed during the war, with extraordinary orchestras composed of big names later on from the string world and that sort of thing, who were serving at the time. Amazing years those. But she returned to Australia in 1964 after touring out there with Galliera, the great conductor, and had never been home since she was 12 years old, but stayed in Melbourne to begin with, and then moved to Queensland. And that was where I studied with her when I did a degree at the Conservatorium of Music, when my father was a great lecturer in harmony and counterpoint and director of studies. I still meet many people all over the place who loved his lectures and loved him, and he was a marvellous teacher. I know that Brett Dean attributes his compositional knowledge to Dad, and that's a lovely thing that Brett has gone on to become such a figure in the world. But I learned a lot from him. And then when I left Nancy, who was probably the biggest influence in my life, I should say a bit more about her style really, because she'd studied with Schnabel, so she had all that German background and the English school as well. But she had known Shura Cherkassky from when she was 12 and he was 16 on his first international tour. They met in Australia and they were friends for life. And I think she always was slightly jealous that she hadn't studied with Joseph Hoffman in America the way he had. And she loved the Russian style of playing, Russian colour, and Russian hijinks on the piano. And so her teaching focused on that as well very much. She had a very great breadth of understanding of pianism and of music, and I think I was the beneficiary of that really. From her, I won a Churchill Fellowship. In those years they offered a 2-year special performance award, which took me away to America for 8 months, where I studied with Belashiki, Hungarian. And I'm very glad I had that influence. He had that rigorous Hungarian background himself. He'd studied with Dochnányi, and he also studied with Lipatti, and in fact took over from Lipatti when he died in Geneva. And he's still alive in Seattle, and he had such lucidity of mind, very simple outlook in a way, great sense of structure of the music, and a really crystalline sound on the piano. And that was a great counter-influence in a way to Nancy's rich German approach and a colourful Russian one. After Shiki, well, while I was in America actually, I played to George Bollett as well, and he invited me to come to his masterclasses in the Edinburgh Festival. And so when I moved to London in '79, the first thing I did was go to the Edinburgh Festival and worked for a week with Bollett in a class he held there, and that was a magical time. His sound was just extraordinary in a small room. It was almost overwhelming, the cantabile he had. And we worked on the Liszt Sonata, on the Liszt E-flat Concerto, on Petrushka of Stravinsky, Gaspar, we'd worked on in America. And his way of thinking and his way of pedaling, of thinking of sound, of fingering, all of that has stood me in great stead. I didn't have a lot of contact with him, but it was very influential actually. I went then to the Royal College of Music and studied with Kendall Taylor, who had taught my mother all those years previously. And so it was lovely to continue that tradition, but then also studied with Yonti Solomon for a little time there. And Yonti was such a fabulously imaginative musician. He had a great ear for sound. He had great understanding of psychology as well as music, many things, all of the arts. And this wonderfully liberating sense of imagination. So he remained a friend for life, really. And
lovely man.
Oh, he was a terrific person, wasn't he?
Yeah, I had a few lessons with him. He was wonderful. Yeah, it's really.
I think so many people miss him, both at the Royal College and outside it. So they were the main influences.
And how did you develop your technique?
Well, I think I was lucky. I had a natural sort of technique from childhood, and I probably watching two pianists at home. Not that Mum and Dad ever had much time to play themselves, but my mother was a very fine teacher of young people and older ones. But she gave certain precepts, I think, at the start that held me in good stead always. She gave me the Wieck exercises, which are wonderfully natural. There's one, it's just a 5-finger thing where you da-da-dee-dee-dee, but when you reach the top there are thirds, and it teaches you to relax into the keys, to release at the end and then go up to the next note. There was a little exercise which I always recall with great affection, run and float. I think it might have been a Joan Last exercise.
That sounds like one of hers.
Yes.
Yes.
But Mum gave me that, and all children that, and it's just a matter of starting on middle C and and then releasing the wrist. And of course, you do a swan's neck, and when you're a child, you do a swan's neck sort of as high as you could reach, and then come down and move on to the next group and up again. But it's training the wrist to release the whole time. And I find when I give masterclasses in all sorts of places now, there are so many brilliant young pianists, but they have no idea how to release their wrists and their muscles. You know, they hang on to chords. Once they play them, they grip them still, and they don't know about breathing with the wrist and just releasing the arm. So I think my foundation was very good. It set me up in a way where I was very free in the arms and the wrist. I didn't practice scales or anything religiously at all. I was always very naughty. With Dr. Lovelock, he gave me these Gale exercises and Hanon to be played in all keys, and he felt that if you could play the first 5 studies of Opus 740 of Czerny, you could play anything, which is very probably right.
Yes.
I certainly think I got from an early age the sense of using economical use of the shoulder to get you across the keys as economically as possible. And that is a great thing, you know, if you can play arpeggios up and down very easily with a very natural thumb position, that holds you in great stead later. But I used to turn the corners of the pages down. You know, I'd go for a lesson to look as if I'd practiced them a lot, and he'd say, now don't do too much, you can do too much of this sort of stuff. But when I went to Seattle to study with Shiki, I did for 8 months really concentrate on technique in a way I hadn't before. I used to practice scales with pairs of fingers like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 in all keys, and 2, 3, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 4, 5, and chromatic scales just with 2 fingers or with 3 fingers. And that's another thing that Mum put me onto very early, was chromatic scales, not 1, 3, 1, 3, but using 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3, 4, so that you flowed up and down, and they became like glissandi, and again with a very natural use from the shoulder. That was very useful for later on too. But that work I did in America, practicing with a metronome, pianissimo scales, making sure that every note was even, that was very timely, I think. I had to leave it afterwards. You could get crazy doing that sort of thing. But I practiced various Chopin etudes then, like The Winter Wind, doing all of the quarto exercises for them religiously. And it really did refine my technique. When I came to England, I let go of all that, and really playing has been the greatest teacher of technique, I think. Knowing what you want in your head first, hearing the sound you want first, and then replicating that. Usually teaches you how to cope with something technically. If there is a problem, often you're playing it too fast, and so if you put a metronome on, discover what you're doing, often you're concentrating on the wrong thing. You're not actually aware of what you've got to actually sort out in the texture. When you do actually look at the texture and think, oh, that's happening in that middle, that's happening there. Actually, I'm totally neglecting the left hand. And you realise the priorities of the texture. It's amazing what sorts itself out technically.
Yeah, fascinating. You participated in a lot of competitions though as well.
I didn't actually.
I don't think you did.
No, I stopped doing competitions when I was 23, and I used to enter them after that. Like twice I entered the Tchaikovsky competition and didn't go either time.
Right.
So I didn't do that many. I did several small ones. I was in the first Sydney International Piano Competition and won a prize for the Best Australian Pianist, and that did lead to concerts afterwards. The ABC asked me to play with the West Australian Symphony, the Queensland and the Adelaide Orchestras the next year, which was lovely. And of course it was a great thing to do. I learned rack 3 for the finals. I wasn't in the finals, I was in the semi-finals. But when I was asked to do a concert with the Queensland Symphony, they asked for rack 2. I said, could I possibly do rack 3? Because I wanted to do that for the competition. And so that it made me reach new levels. The year before, I had entered the Liszt Bartók competition in Budapest when I was 18. And that was a fantastic time. I again played in the semi-finals, met all sorts of people, including Annie Fisher, and it was wonderful. She invited me to her house, and I became too scared to go and play for her. It's funny, when you're young, you know, I had no fear of the competition until I started to do well in it and suddenly started to become a bit self-conscious.
Yes, yeah.
But she invited me to my first Wagner opera. I went along to the opera house in Budapest, and thought I'd be in the stalls, and they said something in Hungarian. I ended up being in the second best box in the house, which was her box. It was next to the royal one, which was only used by Communist Party heads in those days. And she later joined me with her sister. We went to a restaurant where all the waiters lined up and bowed to her, and you know, that was heady stuff for an 18-year-old from Brisbane. And I was invited to give various concerts in and around Budapest, and that was a great experience as well. It was a real eye-opener, and to be in a communist country at that stage was fascinating too. The Hungarians were wonderfully rebellious, I think, and they had to do their Marxism exams before they could do their piano exams, but it was fascinating to meet people my own age in those circumstances, and I've always loved Budapest. I was there a few years ago and standing in the top of the Opera House to watch a ballet performance. There were no tickets left, and I looked back fondly down at the box where I'd sat as an 18-year-old.
Which composers do you love to play?
Wow, that's a hard one. I love to play so many different composers. I probably play more of the Romantics than anything else. Certainly a lot of Chopin.
We talked about Chopin the other day. You were playing the Complete Nocturnes. So,
yes, I've been playing them as a set since the bicentenary year 2010, when the Chopin Society asked me to open their year of celebrations, playing all of the nocturnes in St Paul's Church, and it was a wonderful experience. It's such a voyage. You would think playing 21 slow pieces in a row would be terribly boring, but it's not with the Chopin nocturnes. I do them chronologically, and it's fascinating hearing Chopin's language change right throughout when you compare the early E-flat, say, with the last E major. There's a world of difference in the language and in the profundity. And you hear Chopin getting older, but also there's extraordinary variety within them. It's an amazing journey, and I've done it so many times since. I did it at the Wigmore late last year, but have played them in Bridgewater Hall in Manchester and in many places around the world. And just last week in the Huntleth Festival, Julius Drake's Festival up in Wales, I did them across 2 nights then, candlelit. Next year, 6 people in America have asked for them, and it's funny, it's something that seems to be going on, and so I do play a lot of Chopin. I've always loved Bach. More and more I play Schubert. I couldn't live without Schumann and Brahms and certain Liszt. Mozart I've played since I was a child. The Russians as well. I love playing Rachmaninoff and Scriabin. I suppose that follows on from Chopin. So I'm a bit greedy, really.
But I want us to talk about the less well-known composers, because you've done a whole series of rare romantic composer concertos for Hyperion, and that's fabulous. So what makes you want to play slightly less well-known pieces that perhaps most people wouldn't know?
That all started in Australia. I think that was the great thing about growing up in Australia compared with London or anywhere else. There was no particular school of piano playing, and there were no boundaries really. It worked both ways. When I was 17, I said to my teacher Nancy Ware, I found a piece in the cupboard at home last week by Liszt that I think is rather good. And she said, oh, what is it? And I said, oh, it's a sonata in B minor. She said, oh yeah, it is rather good. She didn't let on that it's sort of the acme of the romantic period of piano composition. And I learned it in 10 days and played it at concert practice at the Conservatorium, and then included it in concerts. I really wasn't aware of just what standing it had, and that's great in a way. There was no problem attacking something like that at 17. But likewise, I've found things. When I was 16, I was staying with my grandparents in North Queensland, and at Christmas time there were 2 programs on the telly featuring Isidore Goodman, who was originally English but lived in Australia and was a wonderful pianist. And there was the Schultz-Evler transcription of the Blue Danube, concert arabesques beside the beautiful river Danube. And I thought, wow, I'd love to play that. I that year played Dochnany's Naylor Waltz arrangement of Delibes, and that virtuoso sort of salon piece appealed. And I tried to get hold of it, and it wasn't in print, and I was a bit shocked by that. Amazingly enough, later that year, my German teacher, wonderful chap to whom I played the Naylor Waltz, said, I've got a piece, Little Fox You, and he brought out this dog-eared old copy of the Blue Danube. Couldn't believe my eyes. So I learned it and I played it, and that piece always brought me good luck. And once, sometime in the 80s, I did 3 Quinlers with Hall recitals, and I finished one of them with the Blue Danube of Schultz-Evler. I think, funnily enough, after playing that was 23 Preludes of Rachmaninoff. And the next year, there was a message on my answer phone from Mike Spring from Hyperion. He's the sales manager there, but he's an extraordinary pianophile as well, and responsible for a lot of the decisions about pianists to be recorded and piano pieces that have been recorded by Hyperion over the years. Anyway, he left a message saying that Hyperion had some money given them to start a series of rare romantic piano concertos, and he thought I might be the sort of person who might be interested in that. And I thought, not half. And I rang him the next day, and I said, what sort of things are you thinking of doing? Things like the Moszkowski, and he nearly dropped the phone because that was exactly what they wanted to start the series with, Moszkowski and Paderewski. And I knew the Moszkowski because Nancy had played it. Michael Ponti, when he visited Australia in the early 70s, was shocked to discover that Nancy had already played the Moszkowski, that he was playing there with orchestra. And she had played that on the BBC, for the BBC, way back in the 40s. And when I came to play it somewhere in England, there was this old BBC library copy with cuts marked, and she'd had to make cuts because of the size of the program or something on the spot for this live broadcast that she'd done all those years before, and it was probably the same copy that her conductor had used. Anyway, I said, what made you think of me? And it was because he'd been in that Queen Elizabeth Hall recital performance and heard me doing the Schultz Ever and thought that I was a pianist who liked having fun at the piano as well. And so he was quite right. And that was the start of that. And of course, once you start recording unusual works, people love to put people in boxes.
Yes.
That can be a great problem as well. And so many times I've been asked to play unusual pieces, but not the unusual ones I already play. People want me to play their rare music, so I've ended up accruing a great deal of rare repertoire. But I do love looking at the texture of history as well, because it didn't lurch from one genius to the next. There was a whole texture behind things. Chopin wouldn't have been Chopin without all sorts of other composers at that time doing things, and Chopin wouldn't have written the E minor concerto without Hummel having first written his B minor concerto and A minor, and I've played both of those. And it makes so much sense of the Chopin then when you play that afterwards. It's lovely finding out about history and the fabric of history through these rare composers. Of course, you're not going to find a Beethoven forum, or very, very unlikely to, but there's often great musical fun to be had, and a lot of depth as well. I love sharing those pieces too. It's great fun when you can produce a piece that nobody's heard of before.
Definitely.
And they find they love it, and that's a great joy.
You're artistic director of the annual Myra Hess Day at the National Gallery.
Yes.
And also you do a performance with the actress Patricia Routledge, and
Yes.
wanted to ask how that all came about, really.
Well, it was all thanks to a marvellous lady called Carmel Hart, who is full of brilliant ideas, and she wanted to put on a day in memory of Dame Myra Hess's wartime series. That series is legendary. People speak of it always, but there had never been an actual celebration of it at the gallery. And so in 2006, she called a group together, including the Jewish Music Institute and various others of us, and Myra's nephew, Nigel Hess, the composer, her other nephew, various people. Anyway, we got together, and she asked me to put the program together, and so I organised a lunchtime concert and an evening concert and an event in the afternoon, which included 9 pianists sharing carnival, which was great fun. That was something that they'd done on New Year's Day 1940, I think, and in the actual wartime concerts. Anyway, it was a big success, and all sorts of people came out of the woodwork. In fact, I had Yonti Solomon play the Goldberg Variations as the lunchtime concert, and it was one of the last times Yonti played before his brain tumour caused too many problems. And that I always feel so grateful for. And Yonti, of course, along with Stephen Kovacevic, had been one of Dame Myra's main students. But it was a great success, and there were some people there who had actually performed in the concerts. There were many who'd been taken there when they were teenagers or younger. And so we thought maybe we should do a second one, and the gallery asked if I would direct it. And then the third year, we put it to the gallery that maybe it should be an annual event, and that's what it's become. There's an annual Dame Myra Hess Day, which I still direct and love doing as well. The next one's on November the 22nd this year. I also direct the Australian Festival of Chamber Music. Have done that since 2007, and that's a great joy to have. Well, it's just over about 3 weeks ago actually. We had 44 artists this time, I think, and about 12 from this part of the world, and the rest Australian. And we have 10 days of concerts, 3 concerts a day, plus a winter school and masterclasses and other events. Always a concert outside Townsville, where it's based. Funnily enough, my mother and her parents were all born in Townsville, and it's odd that I now direct a festival where they were all born. It's on the Barrier Reef in far north Queensland, and it's winter time there, but that means 21 to 26 degrees, which is ideal. We always have a concert outside Townsville. This time it was on Magnetic Island, and it was just amazing hearing a wind quintet and brass quintet, and Ksenia Sidorova, the accordionist, and Nick Daniel on oboe, with David Malouf reading from his own An Imaginary Life about Ovid, between these 6 pieces of The Metamorphoses of Britain on oboe. And all sorts of exciting things happen there. But yes, I love directing things as well.
Putting things together. What's been your favourite venue around the world?
Gosh, well, the Wigmore Hall springs straight to mind.
Yes.
Just up the road from here. Funnily enough, when I first played in the Wigmore Hall years ago, I found it slightly intimidating because it was such a small stage. I was used to having a lot of space around the piano, and the Wigmore, there isn't that much space, you know. Now I adore playing there. You just have to touch a note and it sings to the back row of the balcony. I love that intimacy that it has. There are all sorts of venues I've loved though. Gothenburg, there is a hall that is a simple wooden shoebox. We're always told they had the best acoustics, and they really do. That place, it's the only time I've played Tchaikovsky one where I felt I haven't had to bash out the opening. It just sings, and the orchestra rehearses in there, does its concerts in there, and records in there. Some of the most exciting places I've played, of course, the Royal Albert Hall, playing in the proms. Nothing quite like that. I remember my first prom, people standing just there. It was terrifying in a way, but so exciting and so supportive at the same time. This enormous warmth that comes from proms audiences. And I remember in '91 playing for the centenary of Arthur Bliss's birth, the great piano concerto of Sir Arthur Bliss, which meant a lot to me because my father was 14,000 miles away at 5 a.m. in the morning listening. He'd attached some wire outside and could pick up the broadcast from the BBC out in Australia while it was happening live, and he'd introduced that piece to me, the Solomon performance, when I was about 12. So that was a lovely circle completed. The greatest thrill venue-wise in recent years has been Carnegie Hall. December before last I played the massive Busoni piano concerto there to a packed hall and got a standing ovation afterwards. It was terribly exciting. But to walk out a few days before when I went to try the pianos to select which Steinway I'd use, surrounded by the ghosts of that place, they're palpable, you know. Rachmaninoff played there, and it's thrilling. And that wonderfully elegant, massive hall, that was a great excitement. But there have been small venues that have meant lots of things to me too. I remember playing in a church once in some little outback place in Zimbabwe to 65 people, but some of those people had come from dozens of miles away to come to this concert. I thought the little Broadwood piano wouldn't take it. I was playing an opposite Chopin Etudes and pictures of an exhibition. I thought, how's this piano going to... It did. You know, miracles sometimes happen. And I remember with Tasman Little, the violinist, once giving a concert in Loja in Ecuador. We had this frightful flight where you were flying between spurs of a mountain and had to corkscrew to land, and then a jeep ride. And this wonderful audience, it seemed like the whole town had turned out. The page turner wanted me to play some British contemporary music to see what it was like. And there was the party to end all parties afterwards. There have been amazing venues around the world in unexpected places, apart from the sort of big ones.
Sounds like it. What's your most treasured musical memory?
Well, going back to when I was a child, hearing my parents play two pianos together was a very special thing. And I think that set up my love for two piano work and for working with others. They, as I said before, didn't get much time to practice. They had 5 children, and my mother had 70 students at one stage, and my father was often away examining and adjudicating, apart from lecturing and all that sort of thing. So it was a treat when they got together and would play Bach arrangements or something, or Rachmaninoff or Mozart on two pianos. But playing-wise, gosh, it's so difficult. Those venues I was talking about before, they've led to very memorable concerts. Yeah, I don't know if I had to select absolutely one concert, what it would be. Certainly Carnegie Hall, Busoni in recent years. Many times at the Wigmore, the proms certainly. Special things like playing in Bombay, the first professional performance of Rachmaninoff 2 with the Bombay Chamber Orchestra. That was a special thing. You rehearsed at 7 a.m. back when I did that, because it was hot later in the day and a lot of people had full-time jobs as well. But nearly the whole orchestra shook my hand as it came off stage, and then stacks of people flocked around. I've played in some unlikely places in the world and have loved doing it, and it's left very special memories.
What exciting plans have you got for the future?
Well, more of the same, really. recital-wise, I'm playing in the Mariinsky Theatre in St. Petersburg in December, which is very exciting. That's a new place for me. But lots of exciting plans there. With admission 1 shilling, we were going to talk about Patricia Routledge and the show before in connection with Myra Hess Day. You asked how that came about, and it's an ongoing thing. When we did the first Myra Hess Day in 2007, Patricia Routledge was in the audience. You know, she's a musician as well, and she goes to a lot of concerts. Oh yes, she's a wonderful singer. She's had a glorious contralto voice, and actually she does a show at the moment with Edward Seckerson talking about her musical life, and she sang in 26 musicals or operettas or whatever, including premiering Bernstein on Broadway. Fascinating.
Yeah.
But she was in the audience, and we had met, funnily enough, in Melbourne. I was playing Rack 2 with the Melbourne Symphony back in 2000, and she was doing Oscar Wilde in Melbourne at the time, and couldn't come to one of the concerts, and so came to one of the rehearsals, and that was where I first met her. But anyway, re-met at the National Gallery, and I said, if ever we did anything portraying Myra Hess, would you consider playing her? Because a friend in the audience that day got the fright of his life. He looked around and he thought he saw Myra Hess sitting in the audience. It turned out to be Patricia Routledge, and that's what put the seed in my head, which sowed something. And so 2 years later, I approached Nigel Hess, Dame Myra's great nephew, the composer, about putting a script together from Myra's diaries and from interviews with her and from Kenneth Clark's book about the wartime concerts. And he put together a script, and Patricia and he and Chris Luscombe, the director, and I met for lunches. It turned into 4 or 5 lunches, wonderful times, which extended for hours. We were full of laughs. And we went through every word, editing it together, and we were all on the same wavelength, and produced this show. Nigel and I selected the music, and I played 10 short pieces, about 3 minutes long each, from Myra's repertoire, and Patricia narrates the story, basically in Myra's words. And there are images projected on a screen behind us from the time, and they add a lot to it as well. And so we did that at the National Gallery in 2009, and there are 4 or 5 festival directors in the audience, and Cheltenham invited us to go and do it at the festival, and we wondered how it would be away from the National Gallery, and people loved it. And then we were asked to do it in Canterbury, a wonderful school there, and we had about 800 in the audience, and we thought, not necessarily all musicians in this audience, they loved it, and so we realised it had appeal. And we've done it dozens of times now, and in fact we're doing it later this year several times in Belgium. But I'm absolutely thrilled that Patricia, at her stage of life, has agreed to come to Australia next year, and we're doing about 26 performances throughout Australia in May next year. So it's terribly exciting. Yeah. Yes, that's been a treat. But other future things in different directions, well, more Australian festivals of chamber music. I'm already planning next year. You know, we only finished the last one. It's something that takes up every week of my life. Concerto-wise, there's more Busoni on the horizon next year, and Nights in the Gardens of Spain, which I've never done before, Beethoven 3s. I'm doing 3 Beethoven 5s with the Czech Philharmonic. Les Liszt 1, all sorts of lovely concertos ahead. Well, lots of travel.
What does playing the piano mean to you?
Oof, it's been the whole focus of my life. It was the focus of my childhood. It took me through young adulthood. It made me shift to England from Australia. It's directed the rest of my life, really. It's taken me, well, I travel almost every week of my life, I would say, at least every month, and most weeks, and that's all been directed by the piano. It's led me to develop other areas of myself. I've written and presented many radio programs for the BBC. I've written a lot of articles and CD notes and things like that, so it's developed that writing side. It's led me into artistic direction. It led me into teaching. I taught at the Royal Academy for many years. I've stopped for the moment, but we'll no doubt come back to that later. I don't know, it's allowed me to find meaning in life, I suspect, and it's allowed me to express meaning in a way that nothing else could. I don't know how people who don't love deeply one of the arts cope as they get older. I think music has so many layers. It always has more there than you can ever bring to it, and so deeper and deeper levels available to you as you mature. And so sometimes it's even made me feel better physically. sometimes realise I haven't played for a few days and I might be feeling slightly off colour or something, and I play the piano and I'm actually fine. It's just missing that connection with the piano. So I think the piano keeps me well, psychologically and emotionally and even physically.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Piers.
Thank you.
Thank you.